I do want to go to that slide that is absolutely hilarious that you showed, by the way, with the comparison of the nutrient dense and how you can make a food better. That was taken from the guidelines. So that was from the 2020 guidelines. Is that what
Yes,
X was from?
absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
can you give a few examples for the listener who didn't get to see that slide?
Sure. So they felt that they I forget how many examples, there are maybe five or six. And so you've got, one that's the sort of typical version and then their better version, more nutrient dense. And so it starts on one side with frosted mini wheats as being the typical, and then the nutrient dense version would be unfrosted mini wheats. Okay. And then, we skip over and we get to butter being the typical. Now, we could argue about how typical butter consumption is in the US anymore, but then their nutrient dense version, better choice, was vegetable oil.
Oh my
And
goodness.
then the one that just, when you see it, you just so the typical was soda. That was the typical. And then the nutrient dense choice was sparkling mineral water. So and you wonder, I wonder, because these are intelligent people. I mean, so what must it be? What forces are at work that you could have somebody who's intelligent, like, look at that and go, yeah, that's good, okay, and go on and not go, what are we doing? How is that? You know, I mean, I like sparkling mineral water. As I say, it's one of my go-to choices, but I would not consider it nutrient dense. And how you give a talk, and they say every time you give a talk, you give three. There's the one you plan to give, the one you give, and the one you think you should have given when you get done. And so
Love that.
in thinking about what I was going to say, I meant to reference people to one of Amber O'Hearn's presentations on nutrient density and how it can be less than useful. And yet, I've had some pretty interesting interactions with people from my home tribes because they want to promote the nutrient density of a product produced this way versus another. And, so I try to behave in a way that doesn't shut down future conversations, so I hope I achieve that. Um, but it really has been a distraction for us in many ways, and it'll continue to be until we can get the message more widely known that, maybe a lot of this conversation has been because we've had these incorrect hypotheses, these theories of what produced chronic illness. And one of the things that I find just so encouraging is this theory of hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance is sort of a unifying theory, right? No longer do we have to have, you know, five different things that cause this and six different things that cause that and seven and at the end of the day, I forget at one point, I think they still do it. Um, maybe it's NIH, maybe it's just the American Diabetes Association. I forget which, but they have a list of risk factors for pre-diabetes. And I've heard radio spots for this where they say, take this test and see and whatever. And well, are you over a certain age? Are you a male? Do you have a family history? Well, tell me what you're going to do to alter any of those three things. And so then you get to one or two other things. So it's like three out of the five, you have no chance to moderate at all. And then the other two, they're going to give you at best ineffective advice about how to address those. And so it's like, that's really not a very hopeful message when you have people who are saying, oh, look, we've achieved drug-free remission in 50% of the patients who take part in this. And so I go to my ag community and I start talking to them about some of these things, and some of the people are like, yeah, well, I have this or that, or the doctor, whatever. And well, has your doctor talked to you about drug-free remission? And it's like, no. It's like, well, why does it have to be an agronomist that brings this information to you? And that could work at several levels. So I really do think that this is an enormously hopeful message. And then I can talk to people about how, we have evidence of people in other countries, in this country, integrating grazing animals into crop producing systems and seeing benefits. And so, you'll hear people say things about how we can't feed the world on this kind of diet or whatever. First reaction is, no, we must. We need to shift this conversation completely. This is a moral imperative for those of us who have the opportunity to do this kind of work. But beyond that, I don't think people have fully understood some of the details that they constantly throw out about, if we weren't using all this land to grow beef, then look at all the soybeans we could grow to feed people. And it's ridiculous because the vast majority of agricultural land is not suitable for crop production. But then you get to this idea that, oh well, even on the crop producing land we can do both. It doesn't have to be either or. And in fact, there is no either or. The animal agriculture is an essential part of sustainable food systems wherever in the world. And so we can do things better and we need to improve because, I was just seeing something that said 20% of the meat that's produced every year is lost due to diseases in the animals. And a lot of this is just stuff that, people in higher income countries have learned how to, it's part of animal agriculture, husbandry. So it's not like, yeah, and maybe in some cases we need to do new research, but in a lot of cases it's application of information that's already known. And so then you ask the question, why isn't it adopted? And we should look at all the reasons. But if you could get 20% more out of what you're already doing, that comes directly against the emissions intensities because the animal's already alive and living and emitting and doing all that, but you don't get to harvest the meat from those animals. And then you start to look at other comparisons like I've been to Brazil on a couple of occasions. I have colleagues on both sides of my bridges there, which is really cool. I've got, metabolic health people I've connected with, and I've got the agriculture people I've connected with, and I've gotten to connect them with each other. But Brazil has 3 times the cattle that we do, and they produce less beef.
Hmm.
So and in fact, the FAO put out a report within the last 6 months, maybe it's certainly within the last year, but basically they looked at all the things that could be done to impact emissions from animal agriculture globally. And like the lowest one on the list was dietary changes of humans. So, I
Wow.
mean, it's the thing that gets talked about the most and it has the least impact. Meanwhile, there are other things that if we had people who understood, no, animal source food is essential for proper human development and function. It's an essential part of many rural economies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then maybe we could find the resources to support the kind of work that would make meaningful impact in people's lives, environmental footprints, etc.